Before we do, though, I want to pivot to talk about packaging. And to clear, of your 4,700,000 hours that you've spent chatting with our different customers around how they're using it, a lot of it is spent about thinking about the strategy around the different packaging types. So why don't you talk to us a little bit about how you look at this and how QR codes can support all three?
Yeah, and I think this is a main component of my work at Bitly and working with retailers in general is the use of QR codes on various forms of product packaging, because at the end of the day, product packaging, let's say the main box that you find in a warehouse, that's going to be very different than someone who might need to have it on the product itself. So I want to start out with the tertiary form of product packaging and using QR codes on that. Typically, we'll see this being important to employees that work in like the supply chain space or product manufacturing. These are typically people who are looking at things very big picture, very holistically. How are we going to get these from point A to point B? It comes down to the creation of the box or the container or other type of packaging, ensuring that warehouses, inventory employees can scan these codes to take inventory, show, where they're at any given time, making sure they're printed properly so that they get where they need to be, whether it's a UPS, a FedEx shipping these. So you want to make sure that those QR codes are used on the main box that will hold the product inside of it. Typically, like I said, these are used more so like from an inventory perspective than an aesthetically pleasing perspective. It's making sure logistically things can get where they need to go, as opposed to having like an aesthetically pleasing QR code on what we're looking at from like the primary side of things, which is typically holding like customer information, product information, stuff like that. Secondary packaging, also very important. This is typically the box within the box. This QR code could be important to someone potentially working in the marketing space. They want to make sure their customers know the product setup for furniture they're selling, or maybe instructions and an example if it's an electronic that you need to set up and plug in. As we saw earlier, Daily Harvest, potentially nutritional ingredients for those food products you're selling, or how to use and when to use a skincare product or makeup. Should this be used in the morning or at night? You don't really know, but if it's on that box, you scan it, it'll take you to where you need to go. Really endless ways and types of information you can put on that type of packaging. Also, I would say the main goal of this is not like making it so aesthetically pleasing, because at the end of the day, it typically is thrown away or recycled. You get that box, it does go in the trash. Not many people are keeping that, to be fully transparent, but it is important to have it on there from the get-go so that you open up that box that's being sent in, you see the QR code, I'm going to scan this, I'm going to understand like what's in here. And then moving forward into primary, this could be important to someone in loyalty or brand marketing or analytics. It's important to understand who's scanning these codes on the product to get to where they need to be. Also, this is going to be on the product that the customer is using day in and day out. So they have the opportunity to scan it realistically multiple times a day. Let's say if it's toothpaste or shampoo, something like that, people are using it often. You want to make sure that you're giving them the information they need.
That's great. One thing I love about what you mentioned for the secondary one is just thinking about the use case, right? Is a very transactional scan. It's a transactional omni-channel touch point because the box is being thrown away. And so how do you make sure it's really clear the moment to make the decision is fast? We're not putting too much onus on it. Whereas on the primary ones, we can spend a little bit more time. This is great. We've got some examples here that folks can look at, but Claire, this might be a good time for us to address one of the questions that we haven't had a chance to speak to because it really was about kind of like offering at scale. So we had a question come in that a lot of this, especially earlier on that we're talking through, is great for singular product offerings. What about an auto parts store with hundreds of different SKUs from hundreds of different suppliers? How might they approach using QR codes across the omni-channel?
Yeah, so if these are, let's say, products that are not your brand, essentially a way you could use QR codes is putting in flyers, mail outs, one pagers into those boxes at the store once they're arriving. Another way you could use it is stickers on those boxes that you're placing on each product. You could have different QR codes for each supplier, or you could have the same one based on your branding. Auto parts is super interesting because I've been working with several auto parts industries and companies. Sorry about that. And they always are talking about putting QR codes on tires, which is just no one has figured it out yet. It's been a major issue. Hopefully in the future that can become a thing, but that comes up a lot with us. When you do have your own products with hundreds of different SKUs, that's when you can control the QR code. Unfortunately, if you are getting it from different suppliers, let's say you have 10 different suppliers, 10 different brands, that would require creating QR codes on your end and placing them, like I said, either in the bags, the box, giving it directly to the consumer, or putting it in those boxes that you're sending out if it is purchased online as opposed to in store.
Yeah, that's great. Are there a couple of standout examples for you? And I know we're running close to time, based on that you would call out that are more specific than what's on the screen. Obviously, we've got a few examples of use cases here, but what sticks out to you that you're seeing people use QR codes at scale from your experience?
QR codes at scale, I've definitely been seeing it a lot with electronics companies because they can use a QR code on both the or all the tertiary, the secondary, and the primary types of packaging. So making sure there's touch points throughout, from supply chain and warehousing all the way to the end user and consumer. So that outside box having a QR code that an inventory worker can scan to get it in the right retail location spot, all the way up to the box that the headphones are in, or let's say the router, whatever it might be electronics wise, having that information for setup on the box, and then on the product itself, how to use it, what items this pairs well with. Let's say it's a TV, it might go well with this sound bar, these speakers, this type of remote, etc. So I've seen that specifically. And then also a lot of sustainability companies will be using it on clothing. Like we said, you don't want to have those tiny little plastic hang tags or little cardboard information that ultimately gets thrown away in the trash and ends up God only knows where. So that's always important to companies who take that to heart. They can place a QR code on the product itself and, no waste from that area as well.
That's great. I know we're running hot on time, and part of that, Claire, is because I've been peppering you with a bunch of questions that we're seeing that I have. So I appreciate folks hanging in here. The last thing we want to talk about a little bit, and you actually saw this if you were looking closely, that on each of those sections, primary, secondary, tertiary, we listed 2D barcodes as having a potential use case for it. So I want to talk a little bit more about that. If folks aren't familiar, 2D barcodes is where there's an overall industry push for a lot of retail and CPG to be going toward, because it's a way for us to replace the traditional barcode that we might see with a more rich experience that can be scanned to track and host a lot of different information. So as you can see here, 2D barcodes can store a lot of different things. Claire, what are you seeing, or what are you most excited about when it comes to 2D barcodes in the application that your customers are thinking about starting to deploy?
I'm thinking about it. Obviously, I love it from like an aesthetically pleasing perspective as an end consumer, as we all are. Like, I love scanning a QR code on my skincare products. Like I said, tells you how to use them, when to use them, etc. But also, I'm super excited about it from like a logistics standpoint, supply chain standpoint, making sure that, that traditional barcode, it doesn't hold a lot of information at all. Having the ease of scanning it from your workers and employees with the same system to the end user that's in a store or even in their home when they're receiving a product, that's super effective way to like manage all of the products you have in store. Because like I said, we work with customers who might have, let's say, 100 products within their store, but we're also working with global brands who might have tens of thousands of product offerings. So makes it a lot more simple, straightforward. Obviously, there's some development technical aspects to look at when you're creating these sort of things. But at the end of the day, once that's completed and, streamlined, it's going to become part of your workflow, and it's going to make the day-to-day a lot easier. And it's going to make things easier from like a customer support perspective, returns perspective, customer experience, digitizing everything, making things simpler, just as time goes on, because we are living in such a digital world.